How much of a bozo do you have to be to not understand and interpret this passage properly? Dumb and Dumber over there need to get their eyes checked or their brain checked because I cannot comprehend a simple passage like this. And in today's episode, I have to address two individuals. And yes, I have to just boldly and clearly state it, Dumb and Dumber. People say, wait, hold on a second, Jake. You're being a bit too harsh. I mean, you should see some of these things that these guys say. But nevertheless, the only real difficulty is trying to figure out which one is dumb and which one is dumber. And if you don't know who I'm speaking about William Albrecht, who I've recently debated on whether or not Justin Martyr was a Trinitarian, and Inspiring Philosophy, Michael Jones. William lost the debate so badly that he's had to make like 3 or 4 different live streams, one immediately right after the debate, to try to salvage his position and try to make it look favorable because he lost so terribly in the debate. And it actually has come full circle because someone who he teamed up with is Michael Jones, Inspiring Philosophy in the past, which got this whole debate started. William actually challenged me to a debate on Justin Martyr almost a year ago when he originally did a stream with Inspiring Philosophy on the very same subject. I, of course, responded and accepted, and that was the worst mistake that William has ever made in his debate career. But we'll see just why I'm calling these guys dumb and dumber. I really mean it, that they have room temperature level IQ, maybe somewhere around 70, 75 when it gets on a good day. And we'll see that I'm not actually being too harsh. These guys literally made the same mistake that they made about a year ago. I tried to correct them on the debate, and now they're doubling down. They joined forces again and are still making the same mistake. William talks about me lacking basic comprehension skills, but he lacks basic comprehension skills to be able to read a text like Justin Martyr. Let's take a look at what I'm referring to.
Oh, no doubt.
If Justin is refuting modalists, this idea that there's no division, we're obviously going to agree with Justin as Trinitarians. Notice what Justin says. He says, when I asserted that this power was begotten from the Father by his power and will, but not by abscission, as if the essence of the Father were divided, as all other things divided, are not the same after as before they were divided. And for the sake of example, I took the case of fires kindled from fire, which we see to be distinct from it. We agree there's a distinction there, so no problem.
Wow.
And yet that from which many can be kindled is by no means made less, but remains the same. So what do we see? We see modalism is refuted. We see no evidence of subordinationism. We see subordinationism refuted because it says it remains the same. So what's in the middle there? Trinitarianism. Distinction, but still the same.
Yeah.
Okay, how he thinks this passage helps him is beyond me. We didn't take it out of context. He's the one. And just because he's going to bring up, like Mins, we brought up Olson and Hall, who said, no, that's what Justin is clearly affirming Trinitarian beliefs. And you see something similar, like earlier with dialogue with Trifo. He says, when we give it out, just as we see also happening in the case of fire, which is not lessened when it has kindled another, but remains the same, and that which has been kindled by it likewise appears to exist by itself, not diminishing that from which it was kindled. The word of wisdom, who is himself this God begotten of the Father of all things, in word and wisdom and power in the glory of the begetter.
Yes.
Okay.
It doesn't get any clearer than that. It doesn't.
No, we don't see modalism because we see there's a distinction. So we're perfectly in agreement here with Mins that Jake was quoting that modalism is being refuted. Sure. Okay. But that doesn't mean you get to make the logical leap. This is subordinationism, because if we look at the actual passage right here, it says it remains the same. So you see distinction. And as Justin says elsewhere, they're distinct numerically, but they are still the same as just like you see a fire kindled of a fire, it's still going to be fire. And you see God of God, it's still God. Okay, this is why the Nicene Fathers could use Justin as a source for the creed, because it's God of God, light of light, very God of very God, reminiscent of Justin saying, but remains the same. Case closed. Justin was a Trinitarian.
There's no doubt. And up there is
Case closed, guys. Justin was a Trinitarian. So there's a lot of stuff that we have to get through with this, Mikey. I mean, you lack, honestly, and I made another video which exposed you on how you are completely dishonest. So I wouldn't put it past you. And I was debating. I said, listen, are Dumb and Dumber here genuinely that dumb and ignorant that they're not reading this passage properly? Or are they just so dishonest that they're willing to lie to their audience? Now, I've come down on the side that in this particular issue, I think they are truly ignorant. I think they're actually brain dead. They cannot read a basic text from Justin Martyr and interpret it properly. That doesn't absolve them from being dishonest because, as I showed a couple days ago in a previous video, very clearly Inspiring Philosophy was dishonest when it came to interpreting Michael F. Bird on his own show, explained to him that Justin Martyr was a subordinationist and that he agrees with me based on passages like the one that we're going to take a look at, and as we saw in the previous video. However, in this particular passage, I believe they're truly ignorant, they're truly brain dead, lack basic comprehension skills to even read a text like Justin Martyr and interpret it accurately. Now, Michael says that, oh, he agrees with Parvis and Mins, who are two Catholic patristic scholars who specialize in Justin Martyr, who agree with me that part of this passage is refuting modalism. And for those who don't know, modalists are those who believe that the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are all God, but they're not three persons. They're only one person in the Trinity, and Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are just different names that refer to the same person. Kind of like Jake Brancatella and the Muslim metaphysician. They're not two different people. They're just two names that refer to the same person. So the Father is a name that refers to the Father when he's in heaven. Then the Son is a name that refers to God when he becomes a man. And the Holy Spirit is a name that refers to God after the Son ascends into heaven and all this kind of business. This is a quick summary of what modalism is. Basically, one God, one person in the Godhead, but can appear and be called by three different modes or names. Michael and William said that they agree with me that the infamous chapter 128, which we're going to take a look at in detail here, from Justin Martyr's dialogue with Trypho, it is partially refuting modalism. Now, the reason they say that is because they focus on the term numerically distinct. They think that, oh, when Justin Martyr says numerically distinct, or he seems to clearly be differentiating between the Father and the Son, that is a refutation of modalism. Now, that's partially true, but when he says that he agrees with Parvis and Mins, that's not what Parvis and Mins are merely referring to. And I'll show you what they are referring to when they say that Justin is refuting modalism in just a second. Also, Michael, which I've corrected him several times on now, he keeps repeating this phrase, remains the same. But what he doesn't understand is what Justin Martyr is referring to is not the second fire remaining the same. He's referring to the first fire that is kindling the second fire, i.e. the Father begetting the Son, that the first fire, the Father, remains the same even though he begets the Son. Why? Because Justin Martyr was a proponent of Neoplatonism. He came from a Platonist background prior to becoming a Christian, and he didn't get rid of a lot of his same ideas. So the Platonists had this idea that God is totally immutable. He cannot change in any respect such that he cannot do one thing and then do something else. And so the concern was, how could the Father beget the Son and cause the Son to exist without the Father or the first flame changing? And what he wants to assure the audience is somehow, and I don't know, he doesn't go into much detail in how he imagines this, but the first flame kindles the second one and it remains the same. It doesn't change substantially in any significant degree. That's his concern. So remaining the same is referring to the first fire, the Father, not the Son or the second Father. So to use that to say that therefore this is refuting subordinationism, no, it's not at all. And I already demonstrated and showed from Parvis and Mins in their interpretation of this that this is not referring to them having the same essence or a substantial unity or anything like that. That's Trinitarians reading into the text when it doesn't actually state that, based on their later theological commitments. Now, he mentions Olson, somewhat trying to agree, or he thinks that Olson is agreeing with him in his reading of chapter 128, and that's partially true, but Olson is simply wrong, right? And I already showed what Parvis and Min said, but really, it doesn't matter. The scholars, yeah, you can say cancel each other out. I think that I have the majority of scholars on my side, but let's put that aside for a second, and I'm going to go into chapter 128 and break this down. But before I do this, I want to play one last part of the clip from William where he completely cements these guys and buries them. It's absolutely embarrassing. Let's take a look.
And up there as well, that's a powerful text. The light from the sun, indivisible. Oh, even that right there, up there that you highlighted. Light of the sun on earth is indivisible and inseparable from the sun in the heavens. Look, this is powerful. Everything in reference to the divine essence, the eternal generation of the Son that we've seen over and over. The language simply is not on the side, not on Jake's side at all. And yeah, I gave Jake plenty of time. Go ahead, brother.
Yeah, how is Justin refuting this Trinitarianism when he says it's inseparable and indivisible of the Father? Light of the 100%. Sun on earth is indivisible and inseparable from the sun. But there's still a distinction. There's a distinction between the sun and the rays.
Yep.
So there's a distinction, but it's the same. It's inseparable. Yep. This is not modalism. It's not subordinationism. It's Trinitarianism.
There you have it, folks. They're making the claim that, and William is saying that, and IP affirmed it again, that this text where Justin says that the Father and the Word are indivisible and inseparable, like the sun and the light that comes from the sun. Now, don't worry too scientifically about this. We know it's an outdated analogy. Don't worry about this. What I want you guys to focus on is whose view is this according to chapter 128? Is Justin applying the sun and light analogy to himself? Is he accepting that analogy, which comes with the indivisible and inseparable part? Is he affirming that for himself, or is he attributing that to another group and then refuting them? Well, Michael IP, Inspiring Philosophy, Mr. Jones, and William Albrecht would want you to believe that Justin Martyr is affirming the view of the Son, the Father and the Son are indivisible and inseparable from one another, like the sun in the sky and its light that beams down from the sun. They claim that in this passage, Justin is approving of that position for himself, and therefore it's refuting modalism because there's still a distinction between the sun and its light, but yet they're indivisible and inseparable. Like Trinitarians claim, there's a distinction between Father and Son, but yet the Father and Son are indivisible and inseparable. And then he thinks that it is refuting subordinationism in the passage later on that I mentioned. Now, I'm going to read the text very slowly for you guys. I'm going to break it down and show how these two individuals are extremely low IQ, and they don't realize that what they're attributing to Justin in chapter 128, Justin is actually ascribing that view to someone else, and he is refuting them. Therefore, this shows that Justin is actually refuting Trinitarianism, because part of Trinitarianism is the idea that the Father and Son are indivisible and inseparable from one another. Therefore, what I showed is in chapter 56 of the dialogue, in chapter 60 of the dialogue, and in other places where Justin calls the Son another God, they said, yeah, but that just means another divine person. Now, that's nowhere in the text, but I tried to go to chapter 128 to substantiate the claim that what Justin means by another God is a separate and distinct lesser deity. That's what he's saying. So when I show you in the text that Justin is refuting the position that the Father and Son are indivisible and inseparable, which is foundational to Trinitarianism, because they will admit if you say that the Father and Son are divisible and separate from one another, then that would prove my point that Justin was not a Trinitarian, that he believed that the Father and Son were two distinct gods. And they don't want to accept that, but that's what Justin's position was, because he was a type of henotheist of the Neoplatonic bent, but he was a henotheist nonetheless. He believed in one Most High God, the Father, and then these lesser divine beings. The Son can be called God in some sense, but he's not the Most High God, co-equal and co-eternal to the Father. As promised, let's take a look at the passage itself, the infamous chapter 128. And I'm going to take my time, guys, because I want this to be completely buried, because as I'm telling you, this chapter 128 buries them. Why? Because in order to be an Orthodox Trinitarian, you must believe that the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are indivisible and inseparable from one another. If they're divisible and separable from one another, then they would be three separate and distinct gods. Michael and William should be able to admit that, but as we see, they have difficulty even comprehending a basic text like this. So here you have it. This is chapter 128 from Justin's dialogue with Trypho. Now look at what the chapter heading says, and this chapter heading is inserted by these people. It's not actually part of Justin Martyr's text. It says, the Word is sent not as an inanimate power, but as a person begotten of the Father's substance. So they're adding that in. It doesn't actually say that. that the Son is begotten of the Father's substance. But anyway, let's give it to him for the sake of argument. Now let's see what Justin actually says here. Now remember, this is a dialogue, so this is Justin speaking to Trypho. Justin says, and that Christ, being Lord and God the Son of God, and appearing formerly in power as man and angel and in the glory of fire as at the bush, so also was manifested at the judgment executed on Sodom, has been demonstrated fully by what has been said. So basically he's telling Trypho, hey look, I've already demonstrated that the one who appeared at the burning bush to Moses and these other theophanies or appearances of God in the Old Testament, that is the Son, that's not the Father. Then he says, then I repeated once more all that I had previously quoted from Exodus about the vision in the bush and the naming of Joshua or Jesus, and continued. Now listen to this is an important part. And do not suppose, sirs, that I, meaning I, Justin, am speaking superfluously when I repeat these words frequently, but it is because I know that some wish to anticipate these remarks. So he's saying some people wish to anticipate my remarks. And what do they say? Now he's going to show you he's ascribing the view to other people, not to himself, of what they say about the Father and Son. Those people who are anticipating his remarks and going to disagree with them. What do they say? And he says, and to say that the power sent from the Father of all, which appeared to Moses, or to Abraham, or to Jacob, is called an angel because he came to men. For by him the commands of the Father have been proclaimed to men. Is called glory because he appears in a vision sometimes that cannot be borne. Is called a man and a human being because he appears arrayed in such forms as the Father pleases. And they, notice, what? And they, not and I, and they call him the Word, because he carries tidings from the Father to men, but maintain that this power is indivisible and inseparable from the Father. Whose view is it? Is it Justin? Is Justin saying, I have this view? Or is he saying, I'm anticipating the remark of these other people that are going to say this, that this is their position. And he says, and they call him the Word because he carries tidings from the Father to men, but maintain that this power is indivisible and inseparable from the Father. Just as they say, not just as I say, just as they say that the light of the sun on earth is indivisible and inseparable from the sun in the heavens. So he's saying these people are going to object to my view, Justin's view, and he's saying they say that the Son, or this power, S-O-N, this power, is indivisible and inseparable from the Father. Now, what's the analogy that Justin uses to ascribe to those people who say that the Father and the Son, S-O-N, are indivisible and inseparable from one another? He uses the light, the sun and its light analogy. He says, just as they say, not as I say, just as they say that the light of the sun on earth is indivisible and inseparable from the sun in the heavens. And now I'll demonstrate very clearly how you know that what was just said about the sun and its light analogy and the Father and Son being indivisible and inseparable from one another is not Justin's view. He's ascribing it to someone else, and he's going to go on to refute it. You'll see that clearly. Just as they say that the light of the sun on earth is indivisible and inseparable from the sun in the heavens, as when it sinks, the light sinks along with it. So the Father, when he chooses, say they, the Father, when he chooses, say they, meaning those people, he's still talking about those people, causes his power to spring forth, and when he chooses, he makes it return to himself. In this way, they teach, they. He made the angels. Now he's going to tell you, right? But it is proved that there are angels who always exist and are never reduced to that form out of which they sprang. And that this power, which the prophetic word calls God, now you're going to get to what Justin's view is. He was telling you they, but then he says, but it is proved, meaning now he's going to talk about his own view. He says, and that this power which the prophetic word calls God, as has also amply been demonstrated, meaning by Justin himself, and angel, is not numbered as different in name only, like the light of the sun, but is indeed something numerically distinct. I have discussed briefly in what has gone before, when I asserted that this power was begotten from the Father. So wait, hold on a second. You see this part here? And that this power, which the prophetic word calls God, as has also amply been demonstrated, is not numbered as different in name only, like the light of the sun, but is indeed something numerically distinct. Whose view is this? Because this person who has this view, which is Justin says that the Word and the Father are not distinct from each other, is not numbered as different in name only, like the light of the sun. Wait a second, hold on. But is indeed something numerically distinct. What about earlier? Didn't you see earlier? But maintain that this power is indivisible and inseparable from the Father, just as they say that the light of the sun on earth is indivisible and inseparable from the heavens. So the view of indivisible and inseparable, according to Justin, is tied with the sun and its light analogy, which he's ascribing it to someone else because he constantly says, they say, they say, they say. But then when he gets down to here, he mentions the sun and light analogy again, and he says, and that this power, which the prophetic word calls God, meaning the Word, as has been also amply demonstrated, is not numbered as different in name only, like the light of the sun. So the person who is ascribing or holding to the view that the sun and its light are indivisible and inseparable is not Justin. He's ascribing that view to someone else in the first half of the passage, and then he tells you, no, that's incorrect. The Father and the Word, the Father and the Son, are not different in name only, like the light of the sun and the sun. He's refuting that analogy. He doesn't accept that analogy for himself. How much of a bozo do you have to be to not understand and interpret this passage properly? Dumb and Dumber over there need to get their eyes checked or their brain checked because I cannot comprehend a simple passage like this. So the question is for you two bozos, you two clowns, who holds this view at the bottom here, which is highlighted right now, that the Father and the Word, they say, is not numbered as different in name only, like the light of the sun, but is indeed something numerically distinct. So according to Justin, the people who say or hold to the sun and its light analogy, that means the sun and its light analogy are different in name only. Who is of the view that says the Father and the Son are different in name only? That's modalists. So the analogy of the sun and its light is modalism according to Justin, because they only differ in name. He ascribed that view earlier on in the passage, they, to someone else. He's basically saying, but as for my view, I do not hold, as has already been amply demonstrated by him, meaning that's his view. That's always how he uses the language in his dialogue with Trypho. When he says, as has also been amply demonstrated, that's always referring to Justin's view. He says, is not numbered as different in name only, meaning the Father and the Word are not different in name only. How is that? Like the light and its sun. The light and its sun are different in name only, but is indeed something numerically distinct. So according to Justin, to be numerically distinct is not different like the light and its sun, and those who hold to the light in the sun analogy are modalist heretics, according to Justin. He doesn't say heretics, but modalists, because the sun and its light are differed in name only. But yet, the indivisible and inseparable part, which they're ascribing to Justin because they need it in order for him to be a Trinitarian, in actual fact, he's refuting that. He does not believe that the Father and Son are indivisible and inseparable from each other. He believes that they're numerically distinct. Now, remember all those people from the Eastern Orthodox that say, oh, this counting by division thing? Well, Justin is doing exactly that right here. He's saying they're numerically distinct. How? Because they are divisible and separable from one another. The Father and the Son are divisible and separable from one another. Therefore, they count as two, and since they're both God, they count as two separate and distinct gods. Game over. Chapter 128 blows you guys out of the water because you can't even read a basic passage from Justin. It's embarrassing. So when Parvis and Mins are saying that this passage of chapter 128 is refuting modalism, they're understanding it in the same way that I am, because Justin is refuting the view of indivisible and inseparable of the modalists who say the sun and its light, which he says is differed in name only, and he says that's not true. They're not different in name only. They are numerically distinct, meaning they're separate and distinct, divisible entities. Now, some people may want to come back and say, hold on a second, but Jake, he's only refuting modalism. He's not refuting Trinitarianism. No, he's refuting Trinitarianism in the sense that both modalism and Trinitarianism have in common that the Father and Son are indivisible and inseparable from each other. Justin is rejecting that the Father and Son are indivisible and inseparable from one another. He's not only rejecting modalism and the sun and the light analogy, he's also rejecting the fact that the Son and the Father are indivisible and inseparable from one another, and he contrasts that with them being numerically distinct, i.e. that they are divisible and separable from one another. And then he makes it even clearer. He says, just in case you didn't get it, dummies, he says, I have discussed briefly in what has gone before, when I asserted that this power was begotten from the Father by his power and will, but not by abscission, as if the essence of the Father were divided, as all things partitioned and divided are not the same after as before they were divided. Basically, he wants to refute the notion that the Father is changing in any way by begetting the Son, and he also doesn't want you to have the crude idea that the Father is like ripping a piece of his essence off, like some of the Greek God conceptions had, and therefore that piece of the Father is now becoming the Son. He wants to get that out of your mind and refute that notion. To the contrary, he's not actually affirming substantial unity of the fact that the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit have the same essence. That's being read in by later Trinitarian thought. That's not the point of his analogy or what he's saying. The point of what he's trying to say is the Father is not changing substantially by begetting the Son. And then he says, and for the sake of example, just in case you low IQ individuals didn't get it, I took the case of fires kindled from a fire. So he's saying, remember that sun and light analogy? I reject that. That indivisible, inseparable business, the sun and its light analogy, I reject that. Here's what my analogy is. I took the case of fires kindled from a fire, which we see to be distinct from it. So what is he saying? One fire here, one tiki torch, another one over here. You take the one that's lit and you go and light this one, and now you have two fires which are totally separate and distinct. You see them as distinct and separate from one another, unlike the sun and its light. You see, he says this is his analogy. Two fires, one kindling the other, not the sun and its light analogy, which assumes indivisible and inseparability, which the Trinity is based on, and he rejects. Why? Because Justin believes that they're two separate and distinct gods, and that the Son is not the Most High God. He is a separate, lesser, and distinct divinity. He says, I took the case of fires kindled from a fire, which we see to be distinct from it, and yet that from which many can be kindled is by no means made less, but remains the same. What is he saying? The first fire, which is kindling the second fire, i.e. the Father, which is begetting the Son, the Father is not losing something by kindling the second fire. He's not changing substantially. A piece of him is not being ripped off and becoming the Son. That's what Justin is concerned with. Now, do you low IQ individuals understand how this completely refutes your position and your reading of the text? You are attributing the sun and its light analogy and the indivisible and inseparability part of the first part of the chapter. This part here, you're attributing this to Justin. That's not Justin's view. He says, but maintain this power is indivisible and inseparable from the Father, just as they say. So the indivisible and inseparable part is linked to the analogy of just as they say that the light and the sun on earth is indivisible and inseparable from the sun in heavens. But Justin says, he says, as for me, has already been amply demonstrated, the power which the prophetic word calls God is not numbered in name only, or as different in name only, like the light of the sun, but is indeed something numerically distinct, meaning he's rejecting that analogy. And then he goes on to give you his analogy, two separate and distinct fires that you see as separate and distinct from each other, two separate and distinct gods. And the whole context of the passage he also uses from Genesis, which talks about one Yahweh in heaven and one Yahweh on earth. They're two separate and distinct Yahwehs. They're not the same one. And he says the Jews are incorrect because they think it's the Father who is appearing on earth. But how could that be? Because then there would be no God in heaven. There would be no Father in heaven, and they wouldn't be able to make sense of those those passages in Genesis. So what Justin's saying is, no. The God who appears on earth, that's not the Father. He couldn't possibly become incarnate because he's too distant. They don't have the same power and abilities, and therefore they're not the same God. They're two separate and distinct gods. One is on earth, the other is in heaven. One is a lesser and distinct divinity, the other is the Most High God. It's very simple, it's very clear. So here's a challenge for Dumb and Dumber, and I will die on this hill. I will completely die on this hill. In this passage here, whose view is the beginning part when he says, and they call him the Word, but maintain that this power is indivisible and inseparable from the Father, just as they say that the light of the sun on earth is indivisible and inseparable from the sun in the heavens. You're claiming it's Justin's view. Demonstrate it. He's ascribing that to somebody else and saying it's their view, they say. Secondly, who is of the view at the bottom of the passage when he says that this power which the prophetic word calls God has also been amply demonstrated is not numbered as different in name only like the light of the sun, but is indeed something numerically distinct. Is that Justin's view? And if so, how could he be contradicting himself? You're ascribing that to Justin, that he's affirming the light and the sun analogy and indivisible and inseparable. Then how could he at this part of the passage say that no, they're not numbered as different in name only like the light and the sun? That would be just, if both parts are Justin's view, he would literally be contradicting himself. How do you get out of the contradiction? The first part is what they say, the view that he's ascribing to somebody else and refuting them. And at the bottom, he rejects the light and the sun analogy and gives you a different analogy, two separate and distinct fires, two separate and distinct gods. So tell me, who has the view here at the bottom where Justin says that the Father and Son are not numbered like the light and its sun? Whose view is that? If it's not Justin's, because in order to get out of the contradiction, if you want to ascribe the first part to Justin, you would need to say that this part here is not Justin's view, because one contradicts the other. However, it's very clearly this part here is Justin's view. Therefore, the first part is not his view. Notice he's saying, I say, I have discussed briefly what has gone before when I asserted, and he gives I, the explanation. However, in the beginning part, he's saying they, meaning their view. So Justin is refuting modalism, but he's also indirectly refuting Trinitarianism, because Trinitarians must believe that the Father and Son are indivisible and inseparable from each other. Otherwise, it would have to be two separate and distinct gods, which is polytheism, which we know Trinitarians in reality actually are, but they don't want to own up to it, admit it. So they claim that the Father and Son are indivisible and inseparable from one another. Justin explicitly denies this. Game over. Justin is not a Trinitarian. Go to sleep. Bye-bye. Have a good night, Dumb and Dumber. You guys can settle who's dumb and who's dumber between Michael and William. I'll let you guys be the judge of that. But with that being said, guys, I hope that you found this video educational at the very least. And if you did, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the notification bell so you get notified of future videos. Like, comment, subscribe, and share. Share this on your social media platforms, no matter how big or how small your reach is. Go and share it with Dumb and Dumber on their YouTube platforms. Let them know that they've been thoroughly refuted and there's no excuse from them at this point if they continue to lie and ascribe the indivisible and inseparable and sun and light analogy to Justin, although he refutes it in his passage. If they continue to peddle that lie, then they're clearly dishonest on this point as well after watching this video. And if you guys want to go above and beyond and support my channel, then the best two ways to do so are at the two pinned links, which are at the top of the description of this video, as well as in the comment section. With that being said, guys, until next time, inshallah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.